My wife of 17 years laughed. You're just a janitor with a badge. After I gave her my entire paycheck for her birthday, she mocked me in front of her friends. The next morning, the helicopter landing in our backyard left her speechless. That's what my wife of 17 years said in front of her friends when I handed her my entire paycheck for her birthday. I stood there, holding the envelope, while she mocked me with a laugh I hadn't heard in years. Not the warm, joyful kind, but the cold, dismissive one I'd been hearing more and more. Her friends joined in, sipping their wine and sneering like it was the funniest thing they'd seen all night. I didn't say a word. I just walked out to the garage and sat in my truck. That moment made me realize something had broken between us a long time ago. The next morning, she found out just how wrong she had been about me. I'm Curtis. I'm 48, and I've worked as a custodial security officer for the past 22 years at a government facility just outside Asheville, North Carolina. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and it's paid the bills and built a life. Or so I thought. I met Marla when we were both 30. She was refined, the type of woman who could name a painting's artist and year of creation with one glance. Me? I was always more of a simple guy, raised in a working-class family, hands always calloused, clothes smelling like floor wax and metal polish. I wasn't embarrassed by who I was, but over the years, I think she started to be. In the early years of our marriage, we were good together. I'd bring her coffee in bed before my night shifts. She'd leave little notes in my lunchbox. Elise, our daughter, was born 3 years in. For a while, it really felt like we were building something solid. But things shifted around the 10-year mark. Marla started spending more time at gallery events and museum fundraisers. Her friends changed, no longer the neighbors down the street, but polished women from uptown, whose husbands wore Rolexes and drove imported cars. She started making little comments. At first they were jokes. Harmless. Curtis has his badge, so that makes him official, she'd say with a smirk during dinner parties. I laughed it off. Then they stopped being jokes. She stopped introducing me at events, started comparing me to other men, more successful men. I began to feel like I was being tolerated, not loved. The love I remembered, the one that made us spontaneous and happy, had been replaced with an icy politeness that cut deeper than any argument could. But I kept trying. I thought maybe if I worked harder, saved more, did something special, I could win her back, or at least remind her who I really was. That's why I gave her my entire paycheck for her birthday. It wasn't just a check. It was sacrifice. It was skipping dinners out for months, working double shifts, putting off buying new boots even when mine were splitting at the soles. It was everything I had. She opened it at the party, surrounded by her new friends. She didn't even blink. Seriously, Curtis? $1,300? You clean toilets. What am I supposed to do with this? They all laughed. And she didn't stop them. She laughed with them. I don't know how long I stood there, holding my coffee mug like it was an anchor. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, walked away, and sat in my truck for 2 hours, thinking about everything. How we'd gotten here. What Elise must have heard. What kind of example I'd been setting for her by staying silent all these years. When I finally came inside, Marla was drunk and asleep on the couch. I quietly walked to the guest room. A few minutes later, Elise came in. She didn't say much, just sat beside me and put her head on my shoulder. She didn't mean it, she whispered. But I knew she did. That night, I didn't sleep. Because what Marla didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I hadn't just been a janitor all these years. Yes, I cleaned. Yes, I did the security rounds. But I also listened, learned, observed. Over a decade ago, I started taking online courses during my night shifts, quietly, when things were slow. I paid for certification programs under a different name, so it wouldn't affect my clearance. I'd always had an eye for systems, how things worked, how they could work better. I started writing proposals, quiet ones, and slowly, the people at the top started to notice. 3 years ago, I got a call from one of the directors, Dr. Shankar. He had read one of my memos and wanted to bring me onto a private project as a consultant. I signed a non-disclosure, started helping develop a new protocol for smart security networks. Eventually, I became a silent partner in a tech startup they were spinning off. They paid me quietly. No headlines. No fame. But last year, I cleared nearly 7 figures. The money sat in an offshore account under a trust one created for Elise and me. Marla didn't know. She never asked. That birthday party was my final test for her. I wanted to believe the woman I married was still in there somewhere, that she would see the gesture and understand its meaning. She didn't. And so, the next morning, I didn't go to work. At exactly 7:10 a.m., a helicopter landed in our backyard. I had made arrangements weeks earlier. Elise and I had our bags packed the night before. Marla came running out in her robe, eyes wide, mouth open. The look on her face when the pilot stepped out and opened the door for me, I'll remember it forever. Curtis, what the hell is going on? I looked at her. Calm. Steady. Everything I hadn't been in years. I'm heading to Seattle. There's a company there that needs me more than you do. You're leaving? You're actually leaving. I nodded. I gave you everything I had. And you laughed. Now I'm keeping the rest for myself. Elise didn't hesitate. She walked with me, bag over her shoulder. Not a single glance back. We lifted off while Marla stood in the grass, her arms limp at her sides. That was a year ago. Seattle wasn't part of the original plan. It was a backup idea, something I'd entertained during quiet nights at the facility while clicking through job boards I never applied to. But once the helicopter lifted off and the silence fell between Elise and me, it started to feel real. Like the beginning of something neither of us had really prepared for. The company, Ardent Grid Technologies, was small but hungry. Think 30 people crammed into a downtown building with exposed brick walls and mismatched chairs. My name wasn't listed on any company documents the first 6 months. My role was unofficial at first. The co-founders, Shankar and Neela, had vouched for me privately, but they still had to warm the others up to the idea of the janitor with a badge becoming a project lead. They didn't know the whole story, only that I had helped develop the foundational blueprint for their automated grid logic. The prototype I built on my night shifts at the facility, using scavenged ideas and late-night code sprints, had formed the core of what they'd now commercialized. I never asked for the spotlight, just a place where I could work, quietly, without someone mocking my hands for being too rough. Elise had to adjust fast. Her first few weeks in Seattle were tough. New city, new school, new rhythm. We moved into a small 2-bedroom condo near Pike Place. Not fancy, not flashy, but it was ours. Clean, peaceful. We ate dinner together every night. No more cold silences at the dinner table. She started opening up more, talking about school, art, boys even. It was like I was getting to know my daughter for the first time, not just the teenage version of her, but the real Elise behind the polite good nights and quick hugs back in Asheville. Marla, for the first month, blew up my phone. Missed calls, long texts, a few voicemails, crying, demanding explanations. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Everything I could have said had already been lived through. My silence said more than any apology ever could. Then the texts changed tone. She stopped crying and started accusing. "You embarrassed me," she wrote one morning at 2 a.m. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. Do you know what people are saying? You left with our daughter and didn't give me a chance to explain." But I already knew what people were saying. Her friends, especially the ones who laughed that night, started distancing themselves after the story began to spread. She tried to clean it up, spun some version of "he lied to me," but screenshots of the party, recordings of her mockery, it all surfaced. I didn't leak anything, but someone did. Maybe one of her so-called friends. Maybe Elise, I'll never know. All I know is that by midsummer, Marla had become somewhat of a cautionary tale in her circles. The woman who mocked her husband for being just a janitor and found out too late he was more than she ever gave him credit for. Still, she didn't stop trying. In August, she showed up. I came home from work to find her sitting on the front steps of our building. Dressed up, heels on, hair done like she was headed to a gala. But her eyes were sunken. She looked tired. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. "Curtis," she said. Her voice didn't carry the venom it once did. It cracked on the first syllable. "Elise isn't home," I told her. "I know. I'm not here to see her. I'm here to talk to you." I didn't say anything. Just stood there, key in my hand, waiting. "I didn't know," she said. "About what you were doing. About the company. About everything." I gave a small shrug. "You never asked." She winced, as if I'd slapped her. "I made mistakes," she whispered. I believed her. I did. But not the kind you fix with apologies. "I loved you once," she added. "I loved you for 17 years, I said. Even when you stopped." That shut her up. She stood there, staring at the pavement, arms wrapped tightly around herself. I want to try again." I looked her in the eye. "I'm not the same man I was when I left. I know. And I don't think you ever really saw me for who I was." There was a long pause. She nodded, slowly. Maybe for the first time in years, she understood that I wasn't just talking about job titles or bank balances. "I miss our daughter," she said softly. "She'll come around when she's ready. That's between you and her." She nodded again, her eyes wet. "I should go." "You should," I said. And she did. After Marla left that afternoon, I stood in the hallway of our building for a few minutes longer than I needed to. Not because I was uncertain, just heavy. You don't walk away from a 17-year marriage without carrying some weight with you. Even if you've finally found freedom, there's still a part of you that remembers every good moment like a scar that healed right, but never fully disappeared. Elise got home about an hour later. I was in the kitchen sautéing vegetables and staring blankly at the stove. She dropped her backpack on the floor like usual and walked in with her usual soft, "Hey, Dad." I turned to her. "Your mother came by." She froze, not with fear or panic, just a quiet alertness. "Did you talk to her?" I nodded. "She said she misses you. She can text me," Elise said immediately. "Or not." She walked past me and started helping with dinner without another word. I didn't push it. There's a part of me that still believes children should come to their parents in their own time when the relationship has been damaged. Elise was always perceptive. She saw more during those last few years of our marriage than Marla realized. I never talked bad about her mother in front of her. Never told her how humiliated I felt, how lonely it got near the end. But Elise didn't need my words. She lived it with me. The days settled into a rhythm after that. Art and Grid was gaining traction. Investors started circling. I began spending more time in high-stakes meetings than I ever imagined. The irony of it all, I still wore my old steel-toed boots most days. Some habits don't die easily. One night, after Elise had gone to bed, I was sitting on the balcony, laptop on my knees, running through security protocols we'd been testing. The Seattle skyline shimmered below us, but I couldn't help but think back to that house in Asheville, the one where we had a backyard, a porch swing, and walls that slowly grew cold. That house had sold a few weeks after I left. Marla never mentioned it, but I had a Google alert set on the address, just out of curiosity. The listing was bland, factual, emotionless. A house once filled with laughter, birthdays, arguments, and compromise reduced to square footage and granite countertops. It closed below asking price. I wondered what she felt when she walked out for the last time. Fall came fast in Seattle. The air turned sharp, and the rain found its way into everything. Elise had started painting again. Her bedroom walls were lined with sketches, some abstract, some hauntingly familiar, scenes from Asheville, our old living room, her mother's red wine glass left half full on the table, even the backyard the morning the helicopter landed. One afternoon, I came home to find her at the dining table, bent over a canvas. "Can I ask you something?" she said without looking up. "Of course. Why didn't you tell Mom about the company before you left?" I paused, then walked over and sat across from her. Because I needed to know who she really saw when she looked at me. She nodded slowly, her brush moving again. "And now I know." She didn't press further. But the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was mutual understanding. Elise was growing into herself, and she was starting to see that her dad wasn't just a man who fixed the garbage disposal and paid bills. I was someone who'd made mistakes, who'd loved someone who couldn't love him back the way he deserved, and who finally stopped trying to prove his worth to someone who never truly saw it. But the truth is, healing isn't a straight path. Marla didn't disappear from our lives entirely. Around Thanksgiving, she sent a letter. A real, handwritten one. No envelope. It was folded and slid under the front door sometime during the day. I recognized her handwriting instantly, sharp and elegant, always in blue ink. Elise was at school. I sat down and read it alone. It wasn't long. A page and a half, double-spaced with large loops and careful punctuation. No sobbing apologies. No pleas. Just reflections. She wrote that the silence after we left had been deafening, that her friends had moved on, that the wine tasted different now, that she'd started volunteering at a youth art center because it made her feel useful again. She said she understood now why I left the way I did. And while it didn't undo anything, she wanted me to know that she sees it all now. Her mockery, her emotional distance, the way she made our daughter feel invisible when she was focused on appearances and status. At the end, she wrote, "I didn't lose you because you changed. I lost you because I never looked close enough to see who you were becoming. And you stopped waiting for me to catch up." I folded it quietly and placed it in the drawer next to my desk. I never replied. Not because I was angry, but because some things, some breaks, don't need to be fixed. They need to be left alone, respected, learned from. A few days later, Elise found the letter. She didn't say a word, just slipped it back into the drawer and went back to painting. Winter in Seattle is a strange kind of quiet. Not the peaceful hush of snow like in the mountains back east, but a damp, gray stillness that soaks into your clothes and stays there. It has a way of making everything feel a little more serious, a little more permanent. The kind of season that forces you to sit with your decisions. Elise and I had developed our own rhythm by then. Saturday morning pancakes, her favorite records playing on the turntable we found at a flea market, me nursing coffee while she painted by the balcony door, wrapped in an old flannel I used to wear to work back in Asheville. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was a real one. The letter from Marla remained in the drawer, untouched, unread again. Elise never asked about it, and I didn't bring it up. I noticed she started painting a little differently, though. Less memory, more emotion. Some of her canvases were dark, heavy with blue, gray, and black, but layered, like something was trying to push through. Maybe that's what healing looks like for a 16-year-old girl who watched her family split open in slow motion. The startup was thriving. Shankar brought me into more meetings, more design phases, even offered me a chance to speak at a cybersecurity conference in San Francisco. I turned it down, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't ready for people to see me the way Marla had refused to. I still carried that weight, still wore it like a second skin. In January, something happened that threw all of us off balance again. Elise came home with an envelope from her school counselor. Nothing urgent, just a request to meet. At first, I thought maybe her grades were slipping. I hadn't noticed any major changes, but I wasn't naive. Divorce affects kids differently. I scheduled the meeting. The counselor, Miss Freeland, was kind. Mid-40s, sharp but compassionate eyes. She said Elise had been doing well, actually, exceptionally well, but had recently submitted an essay that raised some flags. Not because it was troubling, but because it was intense. She wrote about the party, Miss Freeland said, sliding the printed pages across the desk toward me. It wasn't titled, just untitled essay, personal narrative. I read it in silence. My hands shook, not from anger or sadness, but from something else, something deeper. In those 5 pages, Elise described the moment her mother laughed at me. How the room fell silent afterward, except for the laughter. How she saw my eyes change. How she went to bed that night afraid that something in me had broken, and she wasn't wrong. She wrote about the helicopter. About how it felt like watching a movie she didn't understand the ending of. And she wrote about leaving. Not just the physical act of getting on the helicopter, but the emotional departure she made from her mother. The realization that love should feel safe, not sharp. That admiration should never be confused with ownership. She's processing, Miss Freeland said gently. In her own way. She's strong. But she's holding a lot. I nodded, throat tight. She's always been like that. She keeps it in until it spills over. She also mentioned that her mother wants to visit. That was news to me. I brought it up that night over dinner. She's been texting, Elise said simply, cutting her food into tiny pieces but not eating. Said she might come to Seattle for a weekend. And Elise shrugged. I don't know. Part of me wants to see her. Part of me wants her to see me, not the version she remembers. Not the kid who kept her head down and stayed quiet at her parties. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. I know. We left it at that. But a week later, Elise told me she'd invited Marla to visit. One day, no overnight stay. Just lunch, maybe a walk. To clear the air, she said. I didn't object. I knew this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about ownership. Elise was taking control of her own story. The day Marla arrived, Seattle did what it always does, drizzled with no urgency. She showed up dressed in beige and gold, a muted version of her old self. Still elegant, still well put together, but smaller somehow. Like life had shaved down the edges. Elise opened the door herself. I stayed back. This was her moment. They hugged, briefly. Not warm, not stiff, just necessary. They went to a cafe down the street. I watched from the balcony as they disappeared into the rain. 2 shadows reconnecting, or maybe just checking the pulse of something long thought dead. When Elise came home, she didn't say much. She hung up her coat, kicked off her boots, and sat on the floor next to the coffee table where her sketchbooks were stacked. She's trying, she finally said. I nodded. But it's not like I thought it would be. I didn't feel anything. No spark. No anger either. Just tired. That's okay. She asked about you. What did you say? I told her you're doing fine. Better, even. That you're happy. I didn't correct her. Happiness is a funny thing. It comes in pieces, in hours, not years. And that was enough for now. Spring came to Seattle in a quiet way. There's no grand blooming season like in the South. Here, it's subtle. The rain slows. The cherry blossoms show up along the boulevards without fanfare. People start taking off their jackets in the sun, and for a moment, it feels like maybe everything you've carried through the winter gets a little lighter. I was sitting in my office one Thursday afternoon, looking over final prototypes for our beta rollout, when my phone buzzed with a call from a North Carolina area code. I didn't recognize the number. Thought it might be spam. Almost let it go to voicemail. But something in my gut said answer it. It wasn't Marla. It was her lawyer. Apparently, Marla had filed a petition. She wanted to challenge the original divorce settlement. According to her lawyer, she now believed that I had misrepresented my financial position during our separation. That she had a right to a portion of the wealth I had hidden during the marriage. It wasn't phrased cruelly, but it was clear she wanted money. More than what the original arrangement had given her. I hung up without commenting. Called my own lawyer. He chuckled. I was wondering when this would happen. The truth is, everything had been done by the book. The trust that held my equity had been legally formed before I left her. The funds weren't marital property by definition. My lawyer had built the structure carefully and thoroughly. But Marla didn't understand any of that. She thought the money I had now was somehow earned while she was still in the picture, and she believed she was entitled to it. The case never made it to court. My lawyer shut it down with a single motion, citing timelines, jurisdiction, and cold hard law. It was clean, clinical, perfect. But something in me wanted closure. Not cruelty, not humiliation, just truth. So I reached out to the high school back in Asheville, Elise's former school. I asked if they'd be interested in having me speak to the senior class about non-traditional career paths. The counselor remembered me, and within a week, I was on a flight back to North Carolina. Elise stayed behind. She had an art show coming up, and she didn't want to miss her prep days. She supported the idea, though. Go. Let them see you now, she said. I stayed in a modest hotel, not far from the neighborhood where our old house stood. The house had a new coat of paint. Different car in the driveway. It looked smaller than I remembered. The event at the high school was simple. I talked about my work at the federal facility. About how I'd started as a janitor with a badge. About learning late. About failure. About reinvention. I didn't mention Marla. I didn't need to. Afterward, a man approached me, balding, pinched expression, slight limp in his walk. I know you, he said. You're Marla's husband. I corrected him. He nodded. She works at the museum again. Part-time. Not quite what she had before. I didn't respond. People talk, he added. Some folks thought you just vanished. Then the helicopter story made the rounds. Thought it was an urban legend. I smiled. It wasn't. 2 days later, I stopped by the museum. I didn't call ahead. I just walked in during their community open house. Marla was standing near a sculpture display, talking to a couple of retirees. She hadn't seen me yet. When she did, she froze. I didn't make a scene, just waited quietly until the conversation ended. Then I walked up. Curtis, she said, like the name was a foreign object in her mouth. Just came to see the art. Her eyes were tired again. She looked older than she had a year ago. Not in a cruel way, just worn. Like someone still waiting for a ship that had sailed long ago. Why are you really here? I shrugged. Because I thought you should see me. Hear from me. I don't want anything. I know. And I'm not here to give or take. Just to speak. She nodded slowly. I want you to understand, I said, that when I left, it wasn't because I was angry. It was because I realized you'd never look at me and see anything more than where I started. You stopped seeing who I was becoming. She swallowed hard. You don't owe me anything, I added. And I don't owe you either. That night, the one with the helicopter? That was me saying goodbye to the version of myself who needed your approval. She didn't cry, didn't apologize. But she looked down. And when she looked back up, her eyes were glassy. I see it now, she whispered. Too late. But I do. I hope you find peace, I said. We both deserved better than the life we were pretending to enjoy. And with that, I left. No shouting. No vengeance. Just truth laid bare. The next week, Elise's art showcase opened in downtown Seattle. I stood in the gallery with a flute of sparkling cider in one hand, watching as strangers stared at her work. Paintings of our old home. The helicopter. A janitor's uniform beside a glowing skyline. One of them had a small plaque beneath it that read simply, "Becoming seen." Near the end of the night, she walked over to me, eyes glowing. She saw the pictures online, Elise said. Mom. She said they were beautiful. She's right, I said. We stood there a while, surrounded by Elise's work and strangers' admiration, and I realized something. This quiet, honest life we'd built was the best revenge of all. No gloating, no screaming, just thriving in full view. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do to someone who underestimated you is prove, without a word, that they were wrong.